Humans don't actually want peace. We think we do, we say we do. But deep down, underneath the logic and the polite conversation, we crave enemies. When there is no war to fight, when there is no threat to fear and no rival to blame, we get restless. We start inventing one. Because without an enemy, we don't really know who we are. For the vast majority of human history, survival did not depend on your intelligence alone. It depended entirely on your belonging. To be alone was not just lonely, it was to be vulnerable. To be outside the group was to be exposed to a world that was not abstract, but brutally immediate. The predators were real. The resources were terrifyingly scarce. Rival groups were not just differing opinions on a screen, they were physical threats standing a few miles away, waiting for a moment of weakness. In that world, belonging meant protection, but that protection came with a strict condition. You had to know exactly who you were, and that identity only made sense when it was compared to someone else. A tribe without a rival was a tribe without definition. The boundaries were not philosophical lines drawn in the sand, they were survival lines drawn in blood. On one side stood familiarity, shared language, shared rituals, and shared kinship. On the other side stood uncertainty. And in evolutionary terms, uncertainty was the most dangerous thing imaginable. So division was not born out of hatred, it was born out of clarity. If someone looked different, spoke differently, or moved differently, your brain did not pause to analyze the cultural nuance of the situation. It categorized: fast, automatic, efficient, friend or threat. Over thousands of years, this simple sorting mechanism became deeply embedded in the very architecture of human cognition. We evolved to detect alliances instantly. We evolved to feel a physical sense of safety when surrounded by those who mirrored us. And we evolved to experience a sharp, visceral discomfort when encountering those who did not. Unity, therefore, was rarely built on universal love. It was built on shared opposition. Groups have always bonded most strongly when facing a common enemy. Conflict sharpened identity like a whetstone. Fear synchronized emotion. The presence of a threat eliminated internal disagreement, because when survival was at stake, personal differences became irrelevant. The tribe needed cohesion more than it needed your individuality, and cohesion required contrast. Without something to stand against, there was simply nothing to stand for. This pattern repeated itself across continents and generations for millennia. Small bands competing for land, clans defending territory, coalitions forming and dissolving in the blink of an eye. Loyalty was strengthened under pressure. Stories were passed down not just to celebrate victories, but specifically to remember the rivals. Memory reinforced the division. Over time, these instincts stopped being conscious strategies and became automatic biological responses. The brain learned a simple equation. Belonging equals safety. Shared anger equals unity. External danger equals internal stability. Even today, the emotional relief people feel when they identify a clear opponent is not accidental. It is ancient. The moment an enemy is defined, the confusion of life fades. Complexity simplifies. The world becomes structured again. There is us, and there is them. The predators may have changed forms. The landscapes may have shifted from savannas to cities, but the underlying wiring remained untouched. And then something unexpected happened. When the external threats began to disappear, the instinct did not disappear with them. Modern humans like to believe they are rational first and emotional second. We like to think that our opinions come from deep analysis. And that conflict comes from genuine disagreement. But the brain does not work that way. Long before you are consciously aware of a belief, your brain has already chosen a side. Psychologists have demonstrated this in experiments so simple they feel almost absurd. Take a room full of strangers. Divide them randomly into two groups, it doesn't matter how you do it. Flip a coin. Assign them red shirts and blue shirts. Even something meaningless like a preference for abstract paintings is enough. Within minutes, something shifts in the room. People begin favoring their assigned group. They allocate more rewards to their side. They judge their side as more trustworthy, more competent, and more deserving. There is no history between them. No shared struggle, no real identity, just a label. And yet the brain reacts as if the division is a matter of life and death. This is called in-group bias, but that name makes it sound clinical, harmless, and technical. In reality, it is ancient loyalty activating automatically. The moment the brain recognizes us, it releases subtle chemical signals of safety. Oxytocin, often described as the bonding hormone, increases trust and empathy within the group. It makes connection feel warm, familiar, secure. But here is the part that is rarely emphasized. That same mechanism reduces empathy for those outside the group. The hormone that strengthens unity also sharpens division. We are wired to feel more for us and significantly less for them. Not because we are cruel, but because historically that bias increased our chances of survival. When resources were limited, neutrality was dangerous. Hesitation could be fatal. Clear alliances saved lives, while clear enemies simplified decisions, and so the brain optimized for clarity over fairness. Even today, when a conflict appears on a screen thousands of miles away, something primitive activates inside you. The mind does not immediately analyze policy or nuance. It searches for alignment. Who represents me? Who threatens me? Once that identification happens, reasoning often follows the emotional commitment rather than preceding it. We do not divide because we carefully concluded that division was necessary. We divide because the brain is built to find structure through contrast. Ambiguity feels unstable. An enemy restores order. When there is a clearly defined opponent, identity strengthens, doubt decreases, cohesion increases. Internal disagreements quiet down because the group becomes simpler. And simplicity feels safe. This is why movements, nations, teams, and ideologies grow fastest under pressure. Not because pressure is pleasant, but because it activates that ancient circuitry that binds people together. The brain does not crave chaos. It craves clarity, and conflict provides it, even when the threat is symbolic, even when it is abstract, even when it is completely manufactured. The wiring does not distinguish between physical danger and social exclusion. It does not distinguish between a tribal invasion and a reputational attack, between territory and narrative. To the brain, belonging is survival. And anything that threatens belonging feels like extinction. The modern world removed most of the physical threats that shaped us. The predators are gone. Neighboring tribes no longer raid villages at night. Survival, at least in many parts of the world, is no longer decided by spears or territory. But the brain did not update its software. The circuitry that once reacted to footsteps in the dark now reacts to headlines, comments, and symbols. The danger is no longer physical. It is reputational, ideological, psychological. And to the brain, the difference is smaller than we think. A disagreement online can trigger the same defensive patterns that once prepared us for combat. Your heart rate rises, certainty hardens, language sharpens. The other side stops being a complex human being and becomes simplified into a category. Not just wrong, but dangerous. Social media did not invent tribalism. It industrialized it. For most of history, tribes were limited by geography. You could only fight the people near you. Now, a deeply tribal species has global communication. We can align with strangers across continents and oppose others we have never met. The scale changed, but the instinct did not. And when external threats decrease, internal differences become magnified. Without a clear outside enemy, groups fragment. Small disagreements become massive identity markers. Nuance becomes weakness. Moderation becomes suspicion. Peace does not erase division. It redirects it. In stable societies, conflict often shifts from survival to meaning. If there is no battle for land, there is a battle for values. If there is no immediate danger, there is a search for moral urgency. Because urgency creates cohesion, and cohesion feels like purpose. A world without clear enemies feels strangely disorienting to us. It feels too open, too undefined. So we simplify it, we divide it, we redraw the lines, us and them. Not because we are evil, but because the ancient architecture of the brain still expects contrast. When a society becomes stable enough, something subtle begins to happen. The large unifying threats fade. There is no invading army, no famine, no immediate danger forcing people into the same direction. And without that pressure, the old tribal instinct doesn't disappear. It fragments. Instead of two large opposing groups, you get dozens of smaller ones. Micro-tribes form around beliefs, identities, lifestyles, preferences, politics, culture, entertainment. Even moral language becomes a boundary marker. The brain still wants contrast, so it finds it in the finer details. When survival is no longer at stake, meaning takes its place. People begin searching for causes intense enough to recreate the feeling of urgency, because urgency brings clarity, and clarity brings belonging. Disagreement stops being about ideas. It becomes about identity. If someone challenges a belief, it no longer feels like a discussion. It feels like a threat to the group itself. And if the group represents safety, then disagreement feels like danger. This is why conflicts escalate so quickly in environments that are otherwise peaceful. The stakes are rarely physical, but psychologically they feel enormous. Without a clear external enemy, societies often turn inward. Internal differences become exaggerated. Nuance becomes betrayal. Complexity becomes suspicious. The tribe still needs cohesion, and cohesion still feeds on opposition. So new enemies are drawn closer. Sometimes they are ideological, sometimes generational, sometimes cultural, sometimes entirely symbolic. But the emotional response is the same. A line is drawn. And once the line exists, the brain settles, us and them, even if both sides believe they are defending something noble. For the first time in history, we live in a world where our survival is not constantly under threat. Many of us will never face war directly. We will never hunt for food. We will never defend territory with our hands, and yet the instinct remains. The need for contrast. The pull toward division. The comfort of belonging against something. But now there is a difference. We can see it. We are the first generation capable of observing the machinery inside our own behavior. We can study the bias. We can measure the hormones. We can analyze the patterns. We can watch ourselves dividing in real time. However, awareness does not erase instinct, but it introduces choice. The ancient brain still reacts first. It still sorts the world into allies and opponents. It still feels relief when a side is chosen and a boundary is drawn. The difference is that now the consequences scale far beyond small tribes in open landscapes. A deeply tribal species now operates global systems, economies, governments, digital networks, weapons that reach across continents, words that reach across billions. The instinct is old. The tools are new, and that mismatch is where the real tension lives. We are not uniquely violent, we are not uniquely divided. We are uniquely amplified. The question is no longer whether we will feel the pull of us versus them. We will. The question is whether we can recognize it before it organizes the world for us. Because if we don't choose consciously, the ancient pattern will choose for us. Maybe humans don't need enemies. Maybe we just never learned how to live without one. For thousands of years, conflict gave us direction. It told us who we were. It told us where we stood. It simplified a chaotic world into clear lines. Now the world is more connected than ever, and the lines are everywhere. The instinct to divide is not a flaw in our design, it is part of it. But for the first time, we are powerful enough for that instinct to shape the entire planet. We are not angels who fell. We are animals who rose, and rising did not erase what we were, it only gave it reach. So the real challenge of civilization is not defeating the next enemy. It is learning how to sit in peace without inventing one.